Welcome back to another deep dive. Today we've got a story that kind of reads like a fiction thriller, but with a true crime twist.
Yeah, definitely. And you know what's so captivating about this case is how it makes us rethink what we know about memory and identity, and even, the justice system itself. Imagine trying to solve a mystery over a century old, where time and social pressures and even just human perception have muddied the waters.
Right, so let's set the scene. It's 1912. The Dunbar family is on a trip to Swayze Lake in Louisiana. Sounds idyllic, right?
Sure. Until you remember that Swayze Lake was known for its alligator.
Oh yeah, that's right. And during this trip, 4-year-old Bobby Dunbar disappears.
Talk about a parent's worst nightmare. And so, of course, panic sets in. The community is terrified.
Naturally. So given the lake's reputation, what did they think happened?
Well, at first, everyone assumed Bobby had fallen prey to an alligator. Can you imagine searching through alligator stomachs hoping to find any trace of him? Gruesome.
Absolutely horrific.
Mhm.
But those initial searches didn't turn up anything, so then the focus shifted,
Right. Instead of tragic accident, they started to suspect a kidnapping.
and months go by. Each day hope dwindles, until a new lead surfaces hundreds of miles away in Mississippi.
And that's where William Walters comes in. He's a traveling piano tuner found with a young boy who looks just like Bobby.
Sounds like a happy ending, right?
Well, on the surface, maybe. But like any good mystery, there's always more to the story.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So tell me more. What's the catch?
Well, Walters claimed that the boy was actually Charles Bruce Anderson, entrusted to him by a woman named Julia Anderson.
But I'm guessing there were some problems with Walter's story.
You got it. The timeline he gave just didn't add up.
In what way?
The length of time he'd been with the boy didn't match up with his explanation. It just raised too many red flags for the investigators.
Like what? What were they thinking?
Well, for starters, why would a mother leave her child with a traveling piano tuner for so long? And why hadn't she reported the boy missing?
Those are some really good points. And meanwhile, imagine being Leslie Dunbar, Bobby's mother. After months of agonizing uncertainty, she travels to Mississippi to see if this boy really is her son.
And the newspaper accounts of this reunion, they paint a kind of mixed picture.
Oh, really? How so?
Some reports say it was instant recognition, a mother's intuition, but others suggest there was hesitation, like maybe she wasn't entirely sure.
That's so interesting. And, it really highlights how unreliable memory can be, especially when you're dealing with trauma and such intense emotions.
Absolutely. Leslie was desperate to believe that this boy was her Bobby.
So what convinced her?
She focused on physical markers, birthmarks, scars, those little details that became her evidence.
And I guess in the court of public opinion, those kinds of details can be very persuasive.
Oh, for sure. But just as everyone was starting to accept this happy reunion, another figure entered the picture and threw the whole story into turmoil.
Oh, wow. Who is that?
Julia Anderson, Charles Bruce's mother. She came forward and claimed the boy as her own.
This is getting complicated. Tell me more about Julia. What was her story?
Well, she was a single mother facing a lot of social stigma and skepticism. She insisted that Walters was just taking care of her son temporarily, and her story actually matched up with Walters.
It sounds like she was telling the truth, so why didn't people believe her?
Well, sadly, her voice was drowned out by prejudice and societal biases.
This part of the story is just heartbreaking. It's a reminder of how easily societal biases can silence the truth. Especially for someone like Julia, who didn't have the same social standing as the Dunbars.
Exactly. It's a classic example of how societal forces can influence people's perceptions of what's true and what's not. And, her situation reminds me of a kind of timeless dilemma. It's like that story of the Caucasian chalk circle.
Oh, I see what you mean. How do you prove true motherhood, especially when subjective interpretations and societal pressures have so much influence? It's such a complicated issue.
And in this case, it's a question that hangs over the whole story because without any solid proof, the courts decided to side with the Dunbars.
So what happened to Walters?
He was arrested, convicted of kidnapping, and sent to prison.
Wow. So both families were deeply affected by this case, but in such different ways.
Right. And even though the courts had made their decision, a lot of people in the community still believed in Walter's innocence.
It's amazing how strongly people can believe in something, even when the evidence is unclear.
It really speaks to the power of belief and how much doubt there was surrounding the true identity of Bobby Dunbar.
Absolutely. And in the midst of all this, what happened to Julia?
Well, despite facing such unimaginable loss and injustice, she showed incredible resilience. She rebuilt her life carrying the weight of her truth, never forgetting her son.
That's an incredibly powerful testament to a mother's love. Her story is one of quiet strength.
It truly is. But the story doesn't end there. the question of Bobby Dunbar's real identity continued to linger. It cast a shadow over both families for decades, until a new chapter unfolded.
A new chapter. Now I'm really hooked. What happened?
Well, that's a story for another time. It involves a quest for truth, groundbreaking advancements in DNA technology, and a shocking revelation that rewrites history.
Okay, now you've really got me on the edge of my seat. I can't wait to hear what happened next.
Well, stay tuned because in part 2, we'll delve into those incredible twists and turns, and trust me, you won't want to miss it.
I definitely won't. So until then, thanks for listening, everyone.
See you next time. When we left off, William Walters was in prison. Julia Anderson was dealing with the loss of her son. And the boy known as Bobby Dunbar was growing up completely unaware of the mystery surrounding his identity. Years passed. The story faded into local legend, you know? But sometimes the truth has a way of coming back to light.
Yeah, it's like it refuses to stay buried. And that's where this story takes a really fascinating turn. We're introduced to Margaret Dunbar Cutright, Bobby Dunbar's granddaughter. She grew up hearing the story of her grandfather's miraculous return.
You'd think she'd be fiercely protective of that story, right?
I would. But Margaret's different. Her story is about curiosity and a real desire to uncover the truth, no matter where it led.
So she sets out on this quest, not necessarily to prove that her grandfather was the real Bobby Dunbar, but just to find out what really happened.
Wow, what a journey. Imagine poring through all those old newspaper articles, tracking down Julia Anderson's children, trying to put together a puzzle that's been scattered across time.
And then in a twist that rivals any crime drama, Margaret uncovers a potential encounter between the two families years after the trial.
Seriously, that's insane. So the Dunbars and the Andersons might have actually crossed paths without even knowing the shared history that connected them?
It's mind-boggling to think about how their lives were so intertwined by this event, and yet they might have been right there next to each other, completely oblivious.
Okay, but hold on, because Margaret's investigation is about to take an even more incredible turn. We're talking about the late 20th century. DNA testing was still a relatively new thing.
Right. It wasn't the widely available tool it is today. But Margaret was determined to find the truth, so she managed to convince two men, one from each family, to get a DNA test.
And they're adults.
They were shocking. The man who lived and died as Bobby Dunbar was not related to the Dunbar family. It was like a bomb went off. Everything people thought they knew about this century-old mystery was suddenly called into question.
Talk about a plot twist. Decades of family history were completely upended in an instant.
It really highlights the power of science. How DNA analysis, a tool that couldn't have even been imagined in 1912, could provide such a definitive answer, a truth that had been silenced for almost a century.
And for Julia Anderson, it was a vindication. Her unwavering claim finally proven true, even though it sadly came long after she had passed away.
It's tragic that she didn't live to see her truth acknowledged, but at least her story, which had been largely overshadowed by the Dunbars, finally had its moment.
It's a small victory, but an important one. And speaking of the Dunbars, what about the real Bobby Dunbar? If the boy raised as Bobby wasn't actually him, then what happened to him that day at Swayze Lake?
That's the million-dollar question. We've solved the mystery of the mistaken identity, but the original disappearance remains unsolved.
It's like we've peeled back one layer of the onion only to find another one underneath.
Exactly. From a historical puzzle, we're now facing a full-blown cold case. And as we delve deeper into this cold case, we'll uncover even more about the complexities of memory, the fallibility of eyewitness accounts, and the lasting impact of societal biases on our perceptions of truth.
I can't wait. We're about to enter uncharted territory with this case.
Absolutely. And what's so fascinating about the Bobby Dunbar case is that it's not just about the mystery itself, it's about the big questions it raises about the nature of truth, the flaws in our justice system, and the ripple effects that one event can have across generations.
You know, it's kind of terrifying to think about how easily our memories can be manipulated, how eyewitness accounts can be unreliable, and how social pressures can shape our understanding of what's true and what's not.
It really makes you question everything you think you know about the past, and even the present.
So buckle up, listeners, because this deep dive is far from over. We're about to explore some chilling possibilities about Bobby's disappearance. We'll examine the evidence, the theories, and all the unanswered questions that still haunt this case.
And who knows, maybe by revisiting the story, by bringing it back into the light, someone out there might remember something, a tiny detail, a forgotten memory that could finally help us solve the mystery of what happened to Bobby Dunbar.
Here we are facing the ultimate cold case, the disappearance of the real Bobby Dunbar. We've uncovered a century-old case of mistaken identity and a web of injustice. but the original mystery is still unsolved.
It's like we're in a dense forest, trying to find our way through a thick fog. There's a path somewhere, but every turn leads to more uncertainty.
And yet, even with so many questions, the Bobby Dunbar case is a gold mine for anyone who loves a good mystery.
Absolutely. It forces us to question how we determine what's true and how easily those narratives can be influenced by social pressures. Sometimes even the official accounts deserve a closer look.
It's a lesson in critical thinking for sure. We're dealing with newspaper articles from over 100 years ago.
Wow.
But even back then, you could see how public opinion and assumptions shaped the story. It makes you wonder if any details were missed or if any alternative explanations were just ignored.
Right. And it highlights something that's still so relevant today, confirmation bias.
Explain that.
Remember how everyone wanted to believe that the boy was Bobby, so they just dismissed Julie Anderson's claims? It's that tendency we all have to favor information that supports what we already believe. Even when there's evidence that contradicts it, we can all fall into that trap, especially in today's world where we're bombarded with information from all sides.
Yeah, that's so true. And we can't forget the role that prejudice played in Julia's story. She was judged and dismissed just because she didn't fit society's idea of a credible witness.
Right.
It's a stark reminder of how deeply ingrained biases can lead to terrible injustices and silence voices that need to be heard.
It's a lesson that still resonates today. We need to be aware of those biases and challenge them, both in ourselves and in the systems around us. The truth, as we've seen in this case, can be really hard to find, and sometimes it's the voices on the margins that hold the key.
This case also shows how important evidence-based reasoning is. Just imagine if DNA testing hadn't been developed. Would Julia Anderson's story ever have been believed? Would we still be holding on to a narrative built on a mistake?
It's a chilling thought. The DNA evidence decades later acted as the ultimate truth teller. It overturned a deeply held belief and forced everyone to confront the past. It makes you think, how many other cases throughout history have been skewed by a lack of access to conclusive evidence?
That's a scary thought. How many stories are hidden beneath the surface of accepted history, silenced by circumstance bias or the limitations of the time? It reminds us that justice can be delayed and sometimes even denied when the full truth is hidden.
It can, but there's also a glimmer of hope in this story.
What's that?
Margaret Dunbar Cutright, a descendant of the family who benefited from the mistaken identity, was the one who led the search for the truth.
Yeah.
That says a lot. It shows that empathy and a desire for justice can transcend generations, even within families that have benefited from a flawed system. There can be a desire for truth and a willingness to right the wrongs of the past.
It's a powerful example of the human capacity for compassion and a reminder that we all have a role to play in seeking truth and advocating for fairness.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes just one person driven by curiosity and a desire to set things right to untangle a mystery that's been buried for far too long. As we wrap up our deep dive into the twice-lived life of Bobby Dunbar, we're left with a sense of how complicated the truth can be. It's not always straightforward. It can be distorted by circumstance, perception, and even by the systems we rely on for justice.
But the pursuit of truth is still so important. It's what keeps us digging, questioning assumptions, and peeling back the layers of history to examine the stories we tell ourselves about the world.
And maybe someone listening right now will be inspired to delve deeper into this case, or other historical mysteries, to search for those missing pieces and give a voice to the silenced truths that are waiting to be heard.
Because that's what a deep dive is all about, isn't it? Exploring the unknown, challenging what we think we know, and coming away with a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us. So as you go about your day, think about this. What seemingly settled narratives in your own life might need a fresh perspective? What assumptions could you question? And are you open to the possibility of a more complex, maybe even more truthful reality?